Hello, I'm Aaron Channel, and this is California Convictions Livestream. I'm doing an extra livestream this week. I may actually do a couple of extra livestreams this week. I'm still recovering from a cold, but I wasn't able to record for a couple of weeks because of my cough, and I'm anxious to put out all the content I can. Today, I wanted to speak predominantly about sign language in California prisons. It's an interesting subject because a lot of what you would assume to be true about sign language in California prisons isn't. Of course, I'm no expert. I never did learn sign language, unfortunately, and I wasn't heavily involved in gang politics, fortunately. So it's possible that I'll get a detail wrong here or there. But I did pay attention throughout my incarceration, and I walked out of prison with an interesting perspective on the California prison system's use of sign language. First, it's important to note that I had some knowledge of AMSLAN, American Sign Language, ASL, prior to my incarceration. Whenever I was very young, one of my girlfriends had been diagnosed with a hearing difficulty. She was going to lose her hearing. She took a college class to learn sign language under the idea that eventually she would need it. I took the class with her, and while I gained no fluency, she wasn't an avid student, she wasn't trying super hard, she had a long time to learn the vocabulary, and I didn't excel past her. I just learned the same alphabet and basic vocabulary words that she used. Still, whenever I arrived at California prison, I was shocked to learn, hey, Kenny Nelson, I was shocked to learn that the sign language that people use in California prisons is not ASL. It's very, very close, mind you. It's obviously heavily based on ASL. But there are some specific differences between language in California prisons and what's commonly used. One is that the movements are exaggerated. For instance, if you would ordinarily do something like that, a small hand gesture, that's not going to work because you have to be able to sign out your cell door to somebody all the way across the building in his cell watching you. So a little movement like that may not be enough for him to perceive. As such, all of the hand motions are really exaggerated. They're done slowly and deliberately, and often an extra time over what's usually done. This is because back in the SHU or the BMU or the PHU or whatever part of the prison that they're putting the serious gang members in at that time, they need to be able to communicate all the way across the building. It's a couple hundred feet covertly. They lean against their cell door, and there's a small slot about yay long, which has a window so that you can see out. Or, some places you can't see out your window. You have a clear grate in front of it instead. In that event, what you do is you take a mirror, and you put it on a slight stick, and you hold it out the door like this, and you're able to see in the reflection all the way down the tier that way. As a result, if somebody sticks his hand out the window and does the motion, you're able to see even though you can't see their face. This is a way to communicate where nobody can tell that you and another person are communicating. It's a covert means of nonverbal communication. The gestures are also abbreviated, by which I mean if ordinarily you would do that type of thing in order to demonstrate a sign, that's not going to work. You're looking out a little window. As a result, you have to think of the canvas that people use to sign in prison as about the size of their chest. So rather than this type of motion, it's going to be very close in, like that, because that's all of the range of motion you have. They can't see past the edges of your window. Additionally, most gangs or groups or whoever it is that's coming up with a covert means of communication make small changes to the language. Nothing major. It's not like anybody has the patience or discipline to create an entirely new form of sign. But it is helpful if the sign language that you use, the couple hundred words in your vocabulary, perhaps even the letters in your alphabet, are just a little bit different than what people expect them to be. Even if you just change a couple of letters around, it makes it so that people who aren't members of your gang, or the cop up in the tower with a pen and a paper covertly watching what you and the other guy are doing when you don't realize, can't actually figure out what you're saying, even though they can see your hands. Excuse me. This cough's killing me. I had many opportunities to learn sign language. I didn't, and if we're being honest, one of the reasons I didn't is just laziness. We all have 10,000 things we could have done in a year, and at the end of the year we look back and, gosh, we only did 100 of them at best. Learning sign language is something that I could have taken the time to do, and I don't have a great excuse for why I didn't, but I found other things to do with my time. However, I did have a good excuse, even a good reason to not learn sign language whenever the fellows offered to teach it to me whenever I hit high desert. In fact, I was even discreet about the fact that I already knew my alphabet and probably about 100 simple vocabulary words. This was because learning sign language, being able to communicate covertly, non-verbally across the day room with the shot caller, it's something that you would do if you were prospecting to join a gang or perhaps to work your way up the ranks. It demonstrated that you were disciplined and intelligent, that you were serious about learning a skill that would be useful to the gang. It's something that a lot of people don't realize, that gangs aren't just recruiting every knucklehead who walks up most of the time. If there's an active war, if they need boots on the ground, sure, they'll probably pull you up in the cell and tattoo you that afternoon, stick a knife in your hand that evening. But most of the time, gangs don't want a bunch of knuckleheads and dead weights. You got too many soldiers and not enough Don Corleones. So, anybody who shows up and they're willing to learn skills like the ciphers that people use for the skinheads, it was runes. It was a language based on Old Norse runes, which I conveniently already was familiar with a little bit whenever I came to prison also. And then they substitute letters, or perhaps substitute a word here or there, add a number code out of the King James Bible, something like that, to further make it just a little bit more encrypted. If you're willing to learn these skills, how to communicate in the gang language, all the symbology, if you're willing to basically show that you're intelligent and want to be involved in the real work of the gang, which of course is keeping the prison yard in check, distributing and collecting money for drugs, and shooting that money to the shot callers. That's what the business of a gang is. I realize that there's 100 other things that a gang does, but at the end of the day, if the money isn't going to the guys on top, well then what's the whole program for? One of the ways that you made yourself useful was by learning the sign language of the gang. And so I very deliberately didn't learn it. Whenever I had people offer to teach me, I'd go, gosh, that's pretty complicated. I'll do that some other time. Just on the idea that I didn't want to be seen to be attempting to prospect my way up the ranks, which was perhaps not a concern. I was always trying to be overly cautious about things like that, making it very clear that I was a square, that I was not involved in the politics and stuff. It was just my way of keeping my nose out of everybody's business for as long as I could. I didn't want to know. Eventually, after I rolled up and left High Desert, I came to regret this decision. I was moved to Saddf, the substance abuse treatment facility in Corcoran, California. Corcoran 2, New Corcoran, Saddf SP. It has a lot of names. But basically, it's the protective custody prison right next to Corcoran Prison, the old school prison where they have the SHU, where they send all of the real dangerous inmates, and where they have the PHU, where they send the monsters like Philip Garrido. There at Saddf, there were a couple of interesting things about the yard outside of it just being a PC yard. One was that it was the designated transgender facility for that chunk of California, for Northern California to Central California. So there were a lot of transgender inmates on the yard, and it created an interesting dynamic. I'd say about 10% of the yard was actively undergoing hormone therapy. It may be as little as 7 or 8. In addition to that, it was the designated hearing impaired facility. The prison administration liked to keep inmates in clumps. All the blind inmates in the state go to one prison. All the deaf inmates go to another. All the guys with HIV go to another still. This is because it makes it easier for the prison hospitals who have to treat the inmates that have these disabilities. They treat them all at once. They have one doctor come and treat 30 people in a day, instead of having that same doctor go to 30 different prisons over the course of a month. It's logical. It makes sense. I found myself at Saddf with literally dozens of people who were fully deaf or at least severely hearing impaired, unable to communicate because I had not only not taken the opportunity to learn sign language whenever I could have, I'd forgotten what I knew prior to my incarceration in the 6 or 7 years that I was at High Desert. It's not that I wasn't able to, work out an alphabet or sit down with a book and communicate with somebody. But it's a skill that if you don't use for a decade, man, it goes quick. I regret that. This is one of the many opportunities that I had to learn something to better myself. And for whatever reason, out of wrong-headedness or foolhardiness or just laziness, I missed it. Another similar opportunity that I really missed is whenever I was in the vocational training program there at Saddf. They make inmates better themselves in prison. This is something people don't realize. If you don't have an education, if you dropped out of high school, because you just weren't going to have the teacher tell you what to do, and so you went and did other stuff, and you got involved in crime, and then you went to prison, and they tell you, well, do you want to go back to school and get your GED? And you tell them, no, I didn't like having people tell me what to do and making me learn back in school, and I don't want to do it now. They'll kind of laugh and go, well, that's okay, but we're going to put you on the list anyway, and we're going to send you to school, and you're going to get your GED. You're going to go 5 days a week, 3 to 6 hours a day for the rest of your prison term. Okay? And if you tell them no, they just put you on C status. No yard, no phone calls, no day room, no anything. Not only does that take all of your privileges from you, your canteen, your packages, it means that you're not going to be good with your gang. Why are you hiding in your cell all day, Wood? Come out to yard. Oh, well, I can't. I'm on C status. Yeah, we know, because you won't go to school. Go to school like everybody else does. We don't care what you do back there. You don't have to learn. But do what the cops tell you, so they let you come out on the yard and you're there when the riot happens. That's the thing. You're not allowed to have some excuse to never come out to yard, even if it's, well, I don't want to go to school. Too bad. It's not about what you want. Prison is not about what you want. So I suppose there's a lesson. Stay in school, drop out of school, I don't know. But if you do drop out, don't think you're going to go to prison and you're not going to finish your education. They will make you get your GED. Well, I already had my GED. The conversation continues. After you get your GED in prison, they say, okay, so now you want to learn some vocations, right? You want to learn how to fix cars, or you want to learn how to do plumbing or electrical, you want to learn to weld. We have a lot of vocational training here at the prison. What do you want to learn? And you say, nah, I don't like to learn. No thanks. And they're going to say, too bad. You're going to go 5 days a week, 3 to 6 hours a day, and you're going to learn 2 trades. We don't care what 2 trades. We have a lot available to you. You're going to learn something. That's how prison works. Same deal. They'll put you on C status if you don't. Maybe you can find an important job. You work in the kitchen. You work as a clerk. You work out on the yard scrubbing the walls. But if you're not working, they're going to put you in vocation. They have plenty of places back there, and they're going to fill them up with somebody. The feds paid them money to teach inmates things. You better believe they're going to get their money. I was placed back in education until I displayed my GED. Then they put me in vocation. I liked vocation. I went to an office services class where they were supposed to be teaching me how to be an administrative assistant. I already knew just about everything they were going to teach me in the class. I went into the class just short of my mouse certification. I typed over 100 words a minute. I had an associate's degree, and I was fine for the things they were going to be teaching, which were basic literacy, basic typing skills, basic computer skills. But I had access to a computer 3 to 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. They let me do whatever I wanted on that thing. It's not like I had internet, but I got to make myself a couple of little programs in Visual Basic, type out letters, play little games that are pre-installed on Microsoft Office. It was awesome. And then they moved me out of that class because I'd been in it long enough, I'd completed enough of the stuff, into a small engine repair class. This is one of those times that I missed an opportunity. I was obstinate. Because they'd taken me out of the class I liked and put me into a class where I had to get my hands dirty and take apart engines, I just stomped my foot and went in the back and read books instead. 3 wasted months. I mean, I did other things. This is in the time period whenever I was completing my associate's degree. And I absolutely did spend that time productively. It's not like I was back there playing cards and just wasting time. Still, though, I had an opportunity to get a Small Engine Association SEA certification. They had all of the tools available to me. I could have tested anytime I wanted. I neglected to take the opportunity. Same as I neglected to take the opportunity to learn sign language. I suppose a large part of life, and especially, having spent so many years of my life in prison, it's about missed opportunities and reconciling yourself to the fact that, well, that went on past, and there's still time to do it if you want to, but you don't get the time back, one way or the other. Jesse Renda notes that he likes my channel and has learned quite a bit from my videos. Much love from South Korea. That's fascinating. I love hearing whenever I have international subscribers, and thank you so much. California prisons, I think, have to be a strange concept to people outside of the United States. You have to understand that in spite of the fact that the United States is a very wealthy nation, we do have a strong criminal underclass, the same as everywhere else does. California, for whatever reasons, has an incredibly sophisticated prison system. The criminals who run the underbelly of the California prison system, they really know what they're doing. As a result, the prisons in California, they're hard as nails. I talked to people from a lot of other countries who said they had done time in fill in the blank. Let's see here. Mexico, Russia, Spain. Off the top of my head, Mexico, Russia, and Spain. I talked to people from all 3 of those countries who said that California prisons were crazy. Now, mind you, my friend who had done time in Mexican prisons had also been involved in a riot in which the inmates took over the prison, tore down a chunk of wall, and executed a couple of people they didn't like. So, I suppose Mexican prisons are insane also. But the story that he told me was that most parts of Mexico that he'd done time, and he'd done a chunk of time, were pretty laid back compared to the nasty parts of California, that whenever you hit the line in California, you really didn't have a choice about whether or not you were going to be involved in things. Of course, eventually I went into protective custody, SNY, and things got soft and easy from there on out. Thinking of sign language and covert means of communication in prison, I like to go back to the idea that each gang or group or whatever they are has their own codes and ciphers that they use to communicate. One of my favorites, one of the cleverest things that I saw while I was incarcerated was a number code based on the King James Bible. The idea was that your gang, whatever it is, just had to get together and agree, okay, so if I write down the numbers 1, 17, 32, I mean 1, the first book of the Bible, Genesis, the 17th chapter, the 32nd verse. And then whenever I write the word 6, or whenever I write the number 6 at the end of that, it means the 6th word in that verse. So all you have is 1, 32, 12, 6, and somebody who has a Bible, whichever one, so long as it's the same one, you have to agree beforehand whether it's going to be the King James or the American Standard or the NIV or whatever Bible your group might elect to use. By writing out enough of these little number codes, you can communicate. You can have whole sentences. Look up the first word, it will be go, the next word will be to, the next word will be canteen, and then from there it will say go to canteen and get a soda. That's glib, of course. Actually, what it's going to say is murder Frank, he's a rat. But this is a way that they were able to ensure that they'd always be able to communicate covertly. Because anywhere in the system, an inmate can go write people, please, I need a King James Bible. Please, I need an NIV Bible, whichever one it is. And it's a guarantee that some nice citizen or perhaps a member of the administration or even another inmate is going to bend over backwards to get you that book because they're assuming that you need it for your own personal spiritual exhortation. And even if the administration gets wise and tries to put out some kind of policy, no members of this gang are allowed to have access to a King James Bible, well, of course, that's going to be squashed immediately by the court. Talk about a gross imposition upon the religious freedom of the members of that gang. I was fascinated by that logic. I thought it was just one of the cleverest things I've ever heard. And I know the administration is hep to this. I'm not giving away the game. This is 30-year-old information. But what a smart way to get around the constraints of prison. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. And man, people in prison deal with a mother of a necessity. You find ways to get stuff done whenever all you have is what you got to think with and what you have inside of your cell. Jesse Renda notes that at least America offers all the educational opportunities within their prison system. A lot of countries don't. That is absolutely correct. And while I was saying that some parts of CDC are hard as nails, where you're going to go there and you're going to get tough or you're going to get got, even in the nastiest parts of the prison, there is so much available to inmates that want to better themselves. They have free college up to your associate's degree. It's covered under the BOG waiver. They'll pay for your books a lot of the time. Not all the time. Some inmates have to find their own books, but tuition, fees, all waived. Anybody in a California prison can get their associate's degree. I did. 4.0, President's List. Behavioral sciences, and boy, I was proud of myself. It was hard to do. Speaking of people that went out and got their associate's degree, because I like to bring them up anytime I have a chance, Scooby got his associate's degree also. What an accomplishment. Good for him. Thinking of cases that I haven't talked about in a little while and that I like to bring up occasionally, I'd like to mention Shane Goldsby. For anybody watching now or in reruns who doesn't know, he was the 24-year-old man who was incarcerated with a gentleman he knew because the man had dated his mother. Shane Goldsby was 24 and the gentleman, Robert Munger, was 70. The cops put Shane and Robert into the same cell. Robert Munger began apologizing profusely. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Shane asked him what he was sorry for. They're locked in a cell. And Robert explained that he was incarcerated for having violated Shane's underage sister, his very underage sister. That's the reason this dude was locked up, and nobody had told Shane. Shane didn't know what had happened. He went to the cops. I need to get out of here. I can't be celled up with that monster. The cops told him, come back later. We don't want to deal with it right now. This is our lunch break, something along those lines. Shane went and told the homies, what am I supposed to do? I can't live with this dude. He raped, molested, violated, hurt. I don't know what word YouTube wants me to use to describe a monstrosity like that. He hurt my sister. What do I do, guys? And I told him, well, you don't have a choice. What you do is you knock him to the ground and you step on his face until you see his brains on the pavement. They pumped Shane up, and whenever Robert came out and apologized again, Shane knocked him to the ground and started beating the hell out of him. As it turned out, he killed Robert. Shane swore it was an accident, that he lost his temper thinking about what the man had done to his underage sister. This happens. It's an awful thing. Shane got a sentence of, I believe it was 24 years for that, for murdering the 70-year-old man who was a serial pedophile who had recently, gruesomely violated, I believe, an 11-year-old girl. Vigilante justice isn't right. I'm not suggesting that this shouldn't be punished, that this dude doesn't need to be locked away for having murdered a man. But a sentence of 24 years for what is obviously a moment in which somebody snapped, in which they were not fully in control of their mind, I feel it's excessive. Who doesn't have the reaction whenever they think of a monster hurting a child, that man should be hurt back, that what somebody needs to do is go put that dude on the ground and end him? It's not the right choice, but the district attorney acknowledged no mitigation for Robert's crimes. None. I don't think that's justice, and so whenever I think of cases that should be talked about occasionally, I bring up Shane Goldsby, ShaneGoldsby. He's incarcerated for the murder of Robert Bunker. He's got, I think, 23 years left to do. I'm hopeful if I talk about him for long enough, maybe something will be done. I'm not saying he shouldn't have been punished. I'm saying that 24 years feels excessive to me. Jesse Renda notes that the prison administration was hoping that it would happen. A detail that I forgot to mention is that what Shane had been incarcerated for had been stealing a police car and leading the police on a high-speed chase. It's been suggested, and by Shane, that what happened was that the administration was trying to get back at him for having embarrassed the local police in such a public fashion. No police officer wants to be engaged in a high-speed chase of their own squad car, which a suspect stole out from under them. I've tangented a little bit. I realized that I said originally that I was going to speak primarily about ASL. This has been approximately a half hour, and I want to thank everybody who did tune in, but my throat is still a little raw. I do expect that I'm going to be doing a couple more live streams in the next week or so, because I'm really happy to be able to be back to producing content. And I may take some of the subject matter that I talked about today about AMSLAN, American Sign Language, in prison, and do a longer, more rehearsed video, which I put out in my more traditional format, because I find the idea fascinating that every group ended up just making small changes to the language in order to facilitate covert and efficient communication across a day room non-verbally. I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and I'm going to close here. Have a nice day.